we have a Senator, Josh Hawley of Missouri, saying he's not going to certify the election for Joe Biden, and he's going to be joining an effort to prevent the election from being certified for him. That's a pretty big development.
Well, it is. There's lots going on. For example, the evidence continues to mount of not only violations of state election law, which is done by local or state election officials, or in some cases even the state judicial officials, that is because the legislature has the sole authority to determine the manner of choosing electors. They do that by passing statutes. When those statutes are ignored, and particularly troubling when statutes to protect against fraud in the casting of absentee ballots, when those statutes are ignored, you don't have a valid election. And so, for example, Wisconsin filed a cert petition just yesterday,
right.
Or not the Trump campaign from Wisconsin. Saying, I mean, you had in Milwaukee and Madison, two overwhelmingly Democrat areas, that the supposedly neutral elections officials actually coordinating these things called, human drop boxes, they called it, democracy in the park, coordinating it with the Biden campaign to go out and ballot harvest, which is in Wisconsin is illegal. And they touted as Joe Biden even had public service announcements that were being put out and paid for by the county clerk's office. I mean, it's just stunning the level of illegality that occurred here. And of course, Wisconsin's only about a 20,000 vote differential. That illegal act alone, there were 17,000 ballots that were illegally put into the system as a result of that alone. They didn't do signature verification. You had those same two county clerks put out notices saying, we've got very strict rules about voter ID, but if you want to get around the voter ID requirements, just falsely claim that you were indefinitely confined because you're fearful of COVID. Well, that was illegal, and the state Supreme Court said it was illegal, and yet there was, a massive increase in the number of people claiming indefinitely confined status, so they didn't have to show voter ID when they cast their ballots. All of these things are designed to protect against fraud, and yet the election officials deliberately ignored those state statutes.
My guest is Professor John Eastman, representing Trump in his personal capacity. Professor, explain to me what Louis Gohmert is doing. He's filed a lawsuit against VP Pence to seek declaratory judgment. He's the sole person to determine whether or not the electors should be seated. Have I explained that pretty well?
Well, that's right. There's the last time we had this kind of a controversial election with multiple slates of electors submitted to Congress, we had one state do it in 1960, Hawaii, but the last big one where it affected the outcome of the election was 1876, and in the wake of that, Congress passed what's called the Electoral Count Act of 1887, and that has several provisions. One of them is, if we've got multiple slates of electors, this is 3 U.S. Code Section 15, multiple slates of electors, then the House and the Senate have to split off into their separate chambers and decide which one to count. And if they can't agree, then the statute says the one certified by the state's executive shall be the one that wins. Well, Article 2 of the Constitution gives the sole power to determine electors to the legislature. And so if the legislature has certified the other slate, I think putting a thumb on the scale in favor of the governor's slate is unconstitutional. What Congressman Gohmert's lawsuit seeks is to have the court declare what's valid in that statute and what's not valid or what's unconstitutional.
So on January 6th, what do you think will happen?
Well, I don't know. We're still waiting on the Supreme Court to rule on emergency cert petition in Pennsylvania and now Wisconsin. If the court ruled, it says states that certify electors in violation of it's unconstitutional. I could think that could dramatically affect what happens on January 6th.
Professor, any reason in your mind that the Supreme Court would be more likely to take up this case than either the Pennsylvania case or the Texas lawsuit?
Well, they can't duck it in the way they ducked the Texas case on claiming no standing, because it's the candidate himself who brought the cert petition. He clearly has standing. Now, they may just say, well, we're not going to do anything in time for this to matter, and completely abdicate their duty here. I remind people that the cert petition in Bush versus Gore was filed on December 8th, and the court had reached its decision by December 12th. So if the court is inclined, they're more than capable of resolving these issues on a very expedited basis.
And assuming for the moment that they're not so inclined, then we're back to what happens on January 6th with people like Senator Hawley. And procedurally, my understanding is that if there's an objection, it has to be joined. If it's a House objection, it has to be joined by a senator. Then there's hours of debate. But ultimately, the vote has to be a majority of both chambers. And since the Democrats are controlling the House, even if the objections are made, I don't see how it is that they're going to vote for President Trump to remain in office for 4 more years.
Well, that's another aspect of Congressman Gohmert's suit. I mean, the statute gives a vote to the House of Representatives and to the Senate that the 12th Amendment doesn't give. It says the President of the Senate shall open the electoral certificates, and they shall be counted. There's no mechanism there for the joint session to have a vote. They're there merely to be present and observe, according to the Constitution.
Professor,
so arguably, what the Electoral Count Act did is claimed power to the separate bodies of Congress. It just doesn't exist.
Understood. We're going to have to leave it there, Professor. Professor John Eastman, good luck. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Take care.